Hello, welcome back to David Galata Book Dreamer. I'm David Galata, and here we're going to be talking about my science fiction work. And in particular, the topic today is going to be on keeping up with current science to become a better science fiction writer. Uh, Personally, I think this is vital. It's very important to look at what the new discoveries are, what the new thinking is. And for that, I'm not really talking about anything that has to do with politics and science. Uh, I'd rather see a separation of those than to merge them. It's kind of like merging religion with politics. Not a good idea, in my opinion. Same thing with science and politics. It's not a good idea. So let's keep them doing what they're doing. But in any case, understanding where science is does not require having a degree in, say, physics or biology, but it does help if you have a bit of an understanding of science, at least from a layman's perspective. That's very important. If you're going to be writing science fiction, you should know something about scientific principles and the scientific method, and at least have it as a hobby. For me, I'm an amateur astronomer. I have a telescope. I like looking at the night sky. I've studied astrophysics on my own. I've looked into quantum mechanics and things like that. I really enjoy looking at science and where it's heading. And for that, I've got a couple of resources to toss at you. The first off is three websites that I use. One is called Eureka Alert, and Eureka Alert has current brevia, current articles from, say, Science Magazine, the Journal of Astrophysics, things like that, that you can look at and read. Now, these do get technical. That's okay. That's okay. The more you read it, the more you get into it, the more you get into it, the more you understand it. But it's worthwhile because Eureka Alert really does showcase what's happening now, not what you're reading in a newspaper 5 years from now, not seeing an article in Scientific American 10 years from now, and not looking at whatever news show you're watching talks about, which is again about 5 to 10 years late. You're looking at current thinking, what was released yesterday. That's important. Most of the times in my years of doing this, and by that I mean my hobby of science, I've noticed that Eureka Alert is very immediate. When things are groundbreaking, they happen immediately. They report it immediately. And then about 5 to 10 years later, I hear about it in the news. That's a little late. So if you want to be a science fiction writer, you've got to be ahead of the curve a little bit. So it's good to actually capture these things right here and now. Now, if Eureka Alert is a little on the dense side in terms of the mathematics and the lingo of it, there are two other resources that I like that I would recommend. One is Quantum Magazine. That's an online service, and they break things down into very readable articles, and they're pretty up to date. They're fairly current, not too bad. You know, maybe about a year behind Eureka Alert, something like that. That's not bad at all. The other one is an online magazine called Nautilus, which also has some very interesting articles, both about science and the philosophies behind science, which is also very good to know if you're writing science fiction. If you're writing fantasy, none of these things are required. If you're writing murder mysteries, they're not really required unless you're getting into forensics, in which case you should look up those sources. You should look up sources about forensics and, investigations and things like that. But if you're writing science fiction, it's great to actually have some science to back up the things that you're saying. The other thing about it is new ideas. There is nothing like reading a journal about astrophysics that whets the appetite for more and to inspire new ideas for your books and your stories. It's wonderful. It's a wonderful resource. Some of the things that are coming out in science, and this has always been true, sound phenomenal. They sound strange. They sound unusual. It gets the imagination going because a lot of it is not even on a human scale. So here it's twofold. One, you've got nature, which is far more unusual than any human being can conceive of. And then you also have bringing the human side to the science. Now that is a very vital area for science fiction to explore. And there, yeah, you can get into the politics if you want. Absolutely, no problem at all, because now you're dealing with how your characters are dealing with and coping with certain scientific principles and ideas, how those discoveries in science affect humanity is a very important topic for us all. It helps to prepare us as a species for what may be coming up. We don't know. We don't know. There's been a lot of discoveries going on in terms of physics. Physics is absolutely exploding with new ideas. Mathematics, cosmology, all of these fields are exploding with fantastic discoveries that we can then look at as non-scientists and go, wow. So what would happen if you were, close to a pair of orbiting neutron stars, or this whole thing with gravity and subatomic structure? Where would that fit in? How could we possibly use that? We look at entanglement in physics, and yes, it is true. Niels Bohr once said that if you claim to understand quantum mechanics, you don't. And that's very true, but it still needs the human input of how do we deal with technologies we don't understand? How do we deal with technologies that are from the baseline of reality where our imaginations fail? How do we as human beings then cope with the new technologies that arise from these discoveries? And there have been quite a few. The computer you're watching this on would not be there without quantum mechanics, would not be there without rocket science, would not be there without cosmology. All of these things have had a tremendous impact on our lives. And now we have to think about, how do we interact with these sciences? How have they affected us? How will they continue to affect us in the future? So in a way, it helps you to get out of yourself a little bit, because some of the stuff is way out there. Had a old meeting with a friend of mine some years ago who worked with studying galaxies and galactic drift. I mean, you think about galactic drift, that is on such a magnificent scale. It is such a huge scale that it makes you feel teeny, tiny, tiny, minuscule. And that is perhaps a good thing. It's a reminder of humility. We human beings lose our sense of humility very, very quickly. So it's nice to get that back, and nothing does that like science. And the other thing is then you can think, wow, what if you were exploring galactic drift, but more directly rather than through a telescope? How would you do that? What would that look like? How could galactic drift affect us someday? These are all very important questions for a science fiction writer. These are, the way that you can look at these things. For example, the core of our galaxy and its central black hole. We're learning a lot about it right now. There's a lot of articles right now about that black hole. that singularity that's in the center of our galaxy has been getting a lot of attention lately. Well, let's look at that. Oh, can you imagine? That would be an incredible thing to study from a more close-up point of view. What would it be like as you get closer to it? Do you have to be at the event horizon to feel the relativistic effects? We don't know. So where we don't know, our imaginations must take over. But our imaginations have to be based on some form of reality. And so the more you read about science, the more foundation, the stronger that foundation is for what you're building up in your fiction novel. You also get the opportunity to say a lot of things that many scientists can't. This is something I was actually told by scientists. I was at an American Association for the Advancement of Science convention. Yeah, it's a mouthful. And I was having lunch with a couple of physicists and an astronomer, and we were talking about issues of speculation. And everyone else on the table was, they were concerned that there were some things they would love to be able to share, ideas that they had, but they couldn't. Because if they did, they would lose their research grants. They would lose their funding. The ideas that are running through their head had nowhere to go. But I was free to do that. I'm an artist and a writer. I'm not a scientist reliant upon grants. So my reputation, it doesn't matter if what I say sounds crazy. I'm supposed to sound crazy. I'm supposed to sound bizarre. That's fine. So they helped me to understand things even better. And some of the speculations they had were fantastic. They were wonderful. They were intriguing. But they couldn't even look into it because that's not what was wanted by the college they worked at, the research lab they worked at, the corporate sponsors that they had, the government sponsors that they had. Didn't want them looking at certain things or speculating about certain things. It was seen as unprofessional, even though it's based on the research that they were doing. That's okay. This is why I don't like it when politics rides in the same cart as science. This is why I don't like it when politics and religion ride in the same cart either. Things get muddy very quickly. Politics? No, please, let's just shove politics out of the way. When it comes to the freedom of expression in science, it's not there. It's not there. There is a lot of pressure to keep things reasonable. But for me, as an artist and as a science aficionado, as a layman who really loves the stuff, this was a gold mine of information and speculation that could then be put into my work. Because it doesn't matter if I'm unreasonable. It doesn't matter if my speculations are wild and unusual. People expect it to be. If you're a science fiction writer, you got to be kind of out there. And that's a good thing, because then the things that the scientists would really love to talk about can come out through you. But that also means you have the responsibility to keep up on the latest sciences. So look online, find science sources that you like, ones that you trust, ones that are coming directly from the scientists themselves. That's why I like Eureka Alert, Quantum Magazine, and Nautilus. Those three resources are my primary ones. I also have others, such as the AAAS's Science. There's also Nature Magazine. These are resources that you can look into. Now, some of them do have a subscription, such as AAAS's Science and Nature. They do have a subscription service. However, Eureka Alert, Quantum Magazine, Nautilus do not. So they're just there. You can subscribe and you get more, resources if you do subscribe. So I say, yeah, go for it. Let's support these people who are bringing science to you. It's like paying your professor, paying your tutor. That's basically what you got. But look at those resources and let your mind run wild with the latest things that are coming out in science today. So I hope you've enjoyed this week's installment of David Gullotta Book Dreamer, and I hope to see you next week. Take care, everyone.